Good morning, thank you for coming. I'm Dieter, I'm a release engineer for Arch Linux. So I work on the installation scripts for Arch. In this talk I want to address three things. First of all, the philosophy, because Arch Linux is a distribution that tries to keep it simple, so it doesn't try to abstract a lot of things for the users, and it doesn't try to provide front ends for everything. It expects users to do a lot of work manually. So you could compare it to Gentoo or Slackware. There are a lot of similar distributions, which I hope to address. How many of you are developers for distributions? Oh, nice. And how many of you are involved in the installation tools to perform the actual installation of the system to the user system? Okay. Can you also tell me which distributions you are working on?
Mandriva.
Sorry?
Mandriva.
Mandriva?
Caixa Magica.
Sorry?
Caixa Magica, Portuguese distribution.
Okay, cool. Partus? Okay.
OpenSUSE.
OpenSUSE?
OpenSUSE.
Okay, OpenSUSE. Alright, so I was hoping the Gentoo guys would also be here. Oh, okay. We should make more noise. Because the distributions I hear now are more like user friendliness, and we are more hardcore, I would say.
Bold claims.
So, why do we even provide installation tools? Because we expect a lot from our users, so why would we do all that work?
We don't.
You don't, right, but I will tell you why maybe you should. So, which lessons did we learn with our tools? And then hopefully at the end we can discuss how we could collaborate, share work. And if you have any questions during the talk, just fire away. So, the stuff I'm working on is called AIUp. It's the installation scripts for Arch, but it's literally that, just a bunch of scripts. So that means you can run it on any distribution. We run it, of course, on Arch, on our live media, but you can run it from anything else. The idea was to keep it simple and very hackable for our users. It's a framework because it provides libraries, so that's some shell files that implement a lot of functions, and with those functions you perform backend logic like formatting your hard disks, creating file systems, installing the packages. So it's basically a front end for tools like MKFS and the package manager, but through bash functions. By using those libraries, you can define procedures, as we call them, and a procedure is just like a blueprint that says you need to first do this steps, call this function, then present the user a menu. So the whole blueprint to perform the actual complete installation. We currently support 2 of these procedures by default. That's an interactive procedure. I will show a screenshot later on, which you will understand. It's just like a menu that the user can use. We also have an automatic procedure. It's for Pixie booting, to have auto installs and stuff like that. But the whole philosophy is that everything should be accessible, hackable, overridable. Users can override procedures, they can make new ones, they can implement new libraries, all that kind of stuff. Something that separates our tools from, for example, the Debian installer is that the Debian installer, what they do, when you create your file systems, every time you select yes, I want this, it will actually perform the actual step of creating the file system. We don't do that. We first create the model. That is, it's actually like a bunch of trees. So for example, if you have 2 hard disks, you start with 1 hard disk, you make partition. So partitions, those are nodes in the tree. Then on top of those partitions, you can do like encryption. On top of the encryption, you can put LVM. So you have your physical volume, your volume groups, your logical volumes, and then on top of that, the actual file systems. So first, we present users with all kinds of menus to define this model, which is like an abstract version of the trees, so like a definition. And then only when the user says, okay, I'm satisfied with this complete setup, then he says, okay, I'm done, and it will start processing everything in order. It will do the partitioning, and then it will check dependencies like, do I first need to create encryption, then LVM, and then finally the actual file systems, and it will mount them. It can also do that in reverse, so if anything would fail in the process, it can U-mount destroy the logical volume, destroy the volume group, physical volume, the encryption, so it goes back, and then you can start over again if you want to change anything. It also has support for testing. I will show a screenshot of that. You can obviously test the functions themselves, at build time I call it, but of course it has nothing to do with actual building. And at runtime, so you can create a script, and basically what it will do, it will install the system, and when it's installed, it will boot it, and it will do a bunch of checks like, is this package correctly installed? Does networking work? Is this file available? Do I have this file system with these settings? So this is basically to make my work a bit easier. So every time I do a change in my installation framework, I don't need to check everything manually. I can just run the scripts, and they will check everything if it's more or less all right. So this is how the interactive procedures look like. I just want to go over the steps with you so you have an idea of how it works and what is distribution specific and what isn't. So for example, the first step, select source. Basically what you do there is you define which repository you want to use, which mirror. Some CDs can have repositories on the CDs themselves, so you can hard code, for example, that it should also look over there. The second step, clock setting, is actually optional, but it allows you to change your hardware clock and also to define your time zone and stuff like that. Prepare hard drives, that's basically the step I just explained. You first define the complete model of how you want everything to be. You press OK and it will process everything for you. Package selection is basically calling the package manager and asking which packages are available, and the user just selects which he wants. In the next step, it will actually install all of those. Configure system step is pretty interesting because it tries to reuse what it knows already. For example, if it knows that you have a specific encryption setup with LVM on top of that, it will know, for example, bootloader configuration for grub, what kernel arguments it should provide for your early user space. It can also populate your FS stop. When you set your host name, it knows that it can also populate your etc hosts and stuff like that. So that's some cleverness, more or less. And then you can also manually edit the text files. The final step, the seventh step is installation of the bootloader. Currently that's only grub, but we plan to support syslinux. That's work on the way, and maybe more later on. And when that is done, you can just exit the install, reboot the system, and it should work. So, why did I even create this? And that's the whole philosophy, I think. First of all, like I said, I want it to be hackable for users, so it's a bit more than 3,000 lines of bash code, which is a lot, but still not that much. I think it's still fairly accessible, and bash is a language that many hackers understand. But the next question is an interesting one. If you're a distribution like Arch or Gentoo, oh, you have a question, 5.
I've actually two questions. Have you ever looked at the Solaris installation, the text-based installation?
I haven't.
Okay, I think you should do that to get some ideas, because they do basically what you do, including also network, name lookup, and setting host name and all that stuff.
Okay, I'll look into it.
Second thing is you say, okay, we use bash. If you really think about cross-distribution, bash is not bin sh in
That's
most
true.
cases. So be aware that bin sh is not bash.
It's not?
It's not bash, and it's not PostGIS shell either.
Yeah, I know.
In the real worst case. So keep that in mind. If you want to use bash, you have to ensure that you have bash available somewhere.
Yes, bash is a dependency. But which distributions do not provide bash?
I think Solaris.
Well,
Okay, yeah,
We have
but
planned to drop it in our...
this is a Linux installation framework, and I try to address Linux distributions, so my scope is not that broad that I try to address systems that do not have bash. Okay, to to answer the question, why do I do this? Because for Gentoo and for Arch, what we say, we expect users to do a lot of work manually. They have to call the commands themselves when they run the system. They have to edit text files. Why would we hold their hands, so to say, during the installation? And I have some reasons for that. Because I think the knowledge that you need to install the system on your system is different than what you need to maintain the system, to run it. There is, of course, quite big overlap, but you will also be doing stuff during the installation that you will probably never do again when you run the system. So to take the Gentoo example again, you guys have a very nice manual that describes every step you need to do during the installation. But I find it much easier, because I will never do an installation so frequently, I find it much easier to just have a program that helps me go through it. So when I install a system for my uncle or my aunt or something like that, I just want the menu so I can watch TV, and at the same time I click some buttons and the system gets installed. So I also include casual users who may just want to try your distribution to see if they like it or not. And for them it's also easier if they can just have something like this. So I want to go over the dependencies. Oh, okay.
Basically, in Gentoo's case, there's like 20 commands, and there's also one page listing of them. So is there any different from pressing buttons that you just input the 20 commands?
Well, yeah, I still think it's easier this way for the user.
Why does it make you one button install?
Sorry?
Why does it not make one button install instead of next?
Because then the user wouldn't have a lot of choice, right?
Then you would end up with Windows.
Sorry?
We like the choice. That's why we tell the user to actually enter all the commands, just to educate the user. But in your case, I can imagine you just want the one button thing that does the right thing.
Well, no, because we also provide a lot of possibilities, like specific file system setups, specific packages you want to install.
Okay, but enter then the advanced mode button, and then you can take them all. Because you said, I want to install for my uncle. I guess your uncle just wants you root.
Yeah, well, in that, no. He might want it, but I won't be the guy fixing his computer on the Ubuntu breaks.
So you install Windows.
No, I'm definitely not going to do that.
Not going to be the guy who fixes things.
But actually, like I said, we do have automatic installations. So if you want to make an installation without worrying about any setting, you can just enter one command and it will install it automatically. Okay? So, dependencies, with the exception of Bash, which is on not all of Linux distributions apparently. Everything in the first list should be pretty available. Standard utilities like util Linux ng, coroutils, grep, awk, set. One exception is libui sh. That is also something I wrote. It's basically one shell file with a lot of functions in it you can call to make interacting with the user easier from your scripts. So I will show an example of that in the next slide. But basically you can just call some functions to ask users questions and stuff, and you have the possibility of doing that in really command line mode or in a dialogue mode. So that's an ncurses interface. Because we run it on Arch, we obviously depend on Pacman, but you don't need to. If you want to support this on your distribution, you can just write a library with your package manager. We have a lot of optional dependencies, depending on whether you want support for encryption, LVM, ext, JFS, and so on. A lot of file systems are supported. And of course, if you want to set your network using DHCP, you can have that, or set your time using NTP. Dialog is for ncurses. Grub and syslinux, depending on which bootloader you want to support. And Markdown is just if you want to generate some documentation. So we really try to keep the dependencies same, as in most Linux distributions should have this, right? So this is an example of the libui sh library I was talking about. This is just how you ask the user a question. You can just look at the return code to see if you can proceed or not. You can ask users for a number, like you can specify lower and upper limits, default value. The library will populate the variable for you with the answer in it. You can make the user check specific things in a checklist. So you have basically an array with options, and it will populate an array with answers for you. And you can also use this function if you have a menu and you want the user to select one specific option. So this is the interface in the interactive procedure for the file system model I was talking about. So here you see your actual disk. And as you can see, it's kind of a tree, because the children of these are partitions. And then depending on what you define on the right side, for example, here you define encryption, it will add an entry for the encryption over here. Dev mapper crypt. The T is not on here, but it should be crypt. It's a layout kind of thing. So when you have defined the encryption, this device won't really exist yet. But the installer knows, okay, I should create this entry in the tree so that the user can define his next things. And when you have defined everything, your LVM setup and your file systems, then you can say, okay, I'm done, and it will start doing everything, which looks like this. Yes?
You talk about a tree, but if I look to the layout,
Okay.
it doesn't look like a tree.
No.
Why didn't you create a tree for example?
It would be too complicated to show it actually as a tree. So this is the lipuish library who calls dialog for me, which is an icursus program, and it only supports showing things as lists like this. So logically speaking, it's a tree, but we just represent it as a list.
You couldn't prepend the variables with...
I could do that. Yeah, I could do that, but I decided not to because, as you can see, it's pretty cramped already. I had to make a lot of sacrifices in the layout to at least be able to present useful information. So it will just go over everything like this. First it creates everything, then it mounts everything. This is a screenshot, a pretty old screenshot actually of the test suite. So it boosts the system. You can check whether you have an LVM logical volume with the name crypt pool. The size needs to be 800 megabytes, for example. In this case, it failed. You can check whether mount points exists with specific file systems. You can check whether files exist, whether a file does not exist, whether packages are installed, networking is working, and so on. Okay, what did I learn from this? Bash is kind of limited. We all know that, I guess. The biggest problem was with the file system model. This is also why I spent so much attention on this, because it's a nice feature, but it's difficult to implement for two reasons. First of all, you need the data structure to represent the tree. Thank you. And you also need to be able to query that tree. For example, if the installer needs to make a file system, it needs to know what are all the dependencies of this one. Is there an underlying encryption or an underlying LVM? It needs to trace back to the root to be able to know in which order it needs to do everything. And that kind of stuff is hard to do in Bash. I wrote my implementation of a tree by using a text file and a specific layout, but my idea is later on maybe to outsource this to a program. I don't know, like a YAML library or an XML library or something that I can use on the command lines to do the hard work for me. If I can get rid of that hard work, the code will be cleaner and nicer. Grub is also pretty hard to get right because I don't know why, but they seem to make it complicated for me. You need to call a lot of commands and it's not easy to get installed properly.
Is it grub or is it grub 2?
It's grub 1. We are considering maybe switching to grub 2. We are actually working on syslinux support right now because we are, at this point, we know grub is outdated, it's not maintained properly anymore, it's hard to install. It doesn't have specific features like GPT support, which is a UID partitioning table, which will probably be needed with modern hardware. So we are looking into our options. But actually the syslinux work we're doing right now is looking quite good because it seems to look easy to install. It's very nice actually. daytime setting is surprisingly hard because we use the HW clock tool. I don't know if anyone can recommend me a better tool than this, but it's basically a tool that's based on your system time. Well, with system I mean Linux, your date at the current moment. It can synchronize it to your clock in your hardware, and it can do the opposite. But it's kind of tricky to do with all the complications like time zones and stuff. So if you would be thinking, I'm going to write my own installer for my own Linux distribution, then these would be reasons why you maybe shouldn't do it, and maybe you should cooperate with me, for example. Some challenges for us for the future. Like I said, UID partitioning table, extended firmware interface, and large block sizes. I still need to research a bit into it more, but as far as I understand, it's basically because of the new hardware, and they provide 4 kilobytes blocks on disks, and they need to be aligned and stuff like that. So that's something we should be working on. We want to support Btrfs, still working on it, and Softrate is also not supported yet. But once these 3 things are working, then I will be really satisfied with the product, because right now I think it works quite well, with the exception of these things. We need to work on this. Okay, so you can have an idea right now of the current tool. And of course my idea is to cooperate with other distributions. And as you can see in this list, there are a lot of things that are distribution independent. For example, user interface code, which is, like I said, just a bash library. File system code, for that we rely on MKFS and crypt setup and LVM tools and stuff like that. Bootloaders, just grub or syslinux. Some formats for auto installation. The format I use currently is not definitive yet, so I don't really care much about how the format looks like, but it's obvious there should be a format shared amongst other distributions. Blueprinting, that's just a fancy name I use for defining which steps need to be done and which steps depend on which other ones. For example, you can only do the package installation step after you have actually selected packages. And with package selection, that could mean both interactively, like with the menu, but it could also mean it's hard-coded somewhere in a config file. Time date setting, like I said, I use HW clock for that. It should be available on any Linux distribution I know. And then obviously, like every shell script out there, you want to have error handling, error reporting, and error logging, stuff like that. So what is distribution dependent? Actually not that much. Selection of a source, which is basically selecting a mirror and selecting a repository, maybe media on board of your CD-ROM, but that's pretty much it. Selection of packages, basically you query your package manager for that, and the installation step of the packages. And also some configuration, it depends on distribution. There are some, universal things like fstop or the grub configuration, but other things are distribution dependent. So that's pretty much it. So surprisingly, not a lot. I'm happy with that. So, and this is why I want to get in touch with you guys, especially the Gentoo guys, because I think in terms of philosophy, we agree the most. If we would cooperate, how could we do it? I'm thinking of 2 possibilities. Like I said, we have the concept of libraries, so those are just shell files. We right now have a Pacman library to support our package manager, and that is most of the distribution specific stuff. So if you could provide a shell file that provides some functions that query your packages based on your package manager and stuff like that, we are mostly there. The other alternative is you just fork the project, you create your own branch with your distribution specific stuff. Maybe you could even contribute some generic stuff, I don't know. If you have more ideas, please let me know, but I think the plugin architecture would be quite useful. And that's it. if you want to have more information about this, you can subscribe to our mailing list, which is Arch Relling. You just type it in Google and you will find the address. That's my personal mail. And the project is hosted on 2 mirrors. It's used in Git. Those 2 addresses are actually the same repository, just mirrored to 2 locations. So if you want to have a look at the source code, you just go to either of these sites and you can clone the project and have a look. Geert?
Yeah, since you were talking about automated config files or something to do actually your installation, you have an example of that?
I have an example of that. They are online. I don't have networking on my PC configured yet. Not wireless at least.
But what is it? Plain text files, XML?
It's a plain text file. Actually, if you go to, for example, the GitHub address, you can go to that address, and there's a directory called examples or something like that. And there you can see, I think, 2 or 3 files. One of them is a very standard one. And then there is a more advanced one with LVM and encryption and stuff.
Yeah, because I was thinking why you don't, for example, continue with Red Hat is, for example, using Kickstart files, which is also plain text, which has some particularities maybe for Red Hat, but I think in most cases is pretty common.
Yeah, I've looked at it and it seemed reasonable enough. I could do it, I guess, using the Kickstart format. It's an option. I still need to look into it further. Yes?
I get the impression that you choose Bash because you don't want to have too many dependencies.
That's not the primary reason, it's one of the reasons. The other reason is I want something very simple. Actually, Bash can get complicated, as you probably know.
Yeah, but you know that the thing is that what you bumped into, Bash is not terribly good at parsing data structures.
Yes.
Yeah?
That's my main problem.
You now want to introduce an XML library or some other external dependency to handle this problem.
Actually, yeah, that's what I'm looking into.
Maybe you should look at a different language. You would have used Perl, then it would be a piece of cake.
Yeah.
Why don't you use Perl for your installer?
Well, personally, I'm not a Perl fan. I have looked into Python because I think Python is also an interesting candidate for that. Actually, I could have just written it in Python and gone with Python instead.
I think that your address are basically a no-brainer in Python or Perl or Ruby or whatever you like to use.
Yeah. Well, I chose Bash.
Wouldn't it
makes your life harder?
Wouldn't it have more appeal by like using Python or something? I mean, I personally would like, well, something written in Bash. It doesn't really have much appeal to adopt.
Yeah, but there are a lot of different things you need to consider. For example, Arch Linux users, there are probably a lot of Python fans in there and a lot of Perl fans. But from what I know, most of the people I know understand shell scripting best. So that's what I want to address.
I really doubt it. I really doubt it.
But
I haven't done an official poll or anything like that. So.
But actually, from all the distributions, all the different distributions, because they were saying like, not every distribution comes by default with Bash. Everything comes by default with Perl and Python, for example.
No, I'm not saying that, but everything comes by default with your XML library. There's also a new dependency then.
Yeah, but
so if you introduce one dependency and take one dependency away, it's the same.
Yeah, but dependencies, okay, I want to avoid dependencies too much, of course, but I don't want to have too many dependencies, but introducing 1 or 2 is not a big problem, right?
If you introduce one dependency, Perl, basically parsing tree structures is like a 3-liner in Perl. Yeah,
it could be, but then I limit myself to only the people who like Perl.
I don't know who like Perl, who understand enough about Perl to do this. I think that there are more people who understand Perl than there are people who understand even clearly written Bash script.
I don't know. I have to admit, actually, one of the reasons I did this is just because I wanted to improve myself with Bash, so I should probably also mention that. But still, I think...
I worked for a software company and we expected people working the Bash. You were not allowed to touch it.
I don't know if you have tried Red Hat installer Anaconda. It's written in Pinto And
Sorry, can you repeat?
I don't know if you have tried the Red Hat installer. It's called Anaconda.
Yeah, I have run it once. Yeah.
You know, it's a kind of Python, and there's a debugger inside the installer. And so when I encountered a bug during the installation, I was able to hack the installer during the installation to fix it in order to be able to install.
Did you say it was Python?
It was, yes, it's Python.
So you modify the files while the installer is running?
Yes.
And then
with a Python debugger, which is inside Anaconda, which is during the process. It was a kind of killer feature. I was really impressed that I was able to do this during the
Yeah, that sounds like a really cool feature. We cannot provide Yeah, so if you encounter a bug, which is very unlikely, of course.
No, it's not. No bug in that.
Then in this case, you need to restart the installation.
Yes, that's the problem.
Yeah, but I should look into it maybe. More questions? Okay, well, so if anyone, yes? Yeah, you, Mr. Gentleman.
So I like the thing, actually.
You like the?
Yeah, I might look like a thing, but I really like the idea. Okay, and as you know, Gentoo was more than just installing Linux. We also do Gentoo sort of like the packages on non-Linux platforms. So that's why I was asking you about this. But now I understand that you have this installation environment, and from there you're going to install.
Yeah.
On my non-Linux installation, I don't have a file system I'm going to create. So is your architecture now able to cope with, on this installation target, you don't want to create a file system, but you want to say where is the directory in your file system, under your home or whatever, that you want to install the software packages.
So what you could do in that case, for example, so what he's asking is basically like an interactive installer, but minus the file system step, and just point to an existing file system structure. You can do that. The only thing you need to do is you need to create a new bash file. You say, okay, this inherits the interactive one. Then just look up the function with the menu. You remove the step. Maybe you add your own function that asks the user where is it mounted or something like that.
It's just a directory, right? Just a directory in your system.
Yeah, so
it's just a different way of choosing where it needs to be.
Right, so you just override a function and ask the user which directory is it, or something like that, and it should work. Okay? Yes?
So I think I misunderstood what the talk was about, because what I'm particularly interested in is using Pacman on other distributions. Would you be a good person to talk to about that outside of the context of this talk, or is there somebody better?
There is definitely a lot of people who know much more about Pacman than I do. I know some stuff about Pacman, but not a lot. Maybe I can help you out, but I doubt it, actually. I can give you some contact
information. Maybe you can point me to some people who can help.
Yeah. All right. Yes?
I'm also interested in the philosophy of unified installer at the base level. Perhaps seconding that question, but asking more in terms of the policy as to why you thought it was interesting to go for another installer rather than RPM or dpackage.
Oh, I mean our specific package formats?
Yes. Why you decided on that?
Because we thought other formats are too complicated. Our format is as simple as we could make it without being a pain in the ass for users. So we try to provide some minimal features that should work for most people, but if you want something advanced, we just do not want to provide it because we want to provide a simple code base.
That's more for
That's actually the philosophy in the entire distribution. We do not support a lot of fancy options like use flags on Gentoo or slotting, like that kind of stuff. We just say we don't support it. It doesn't fit in our philosophy, so all our tools can be simple.
You do have dependencies.
We have dependencies, yeah. It's not that simple. Okay, well, thank you for listening. I hope it was enjoyable.